All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to your week 1 extra help video and happy end of week 1. You all survived week 1 and I gotta say, you've all done amazingly well this week. I truly promise I'm not just saying that too. Like, I don't know if it's because we have 5 mentors who are doing an exceptional job this semester at helping to answer questions. I love you, mentors. But I honestly, I don't think I've ever had a semester with this many students who are all nailing it right off the bat. It's just, I swear I'm not lying. You guys are doing a very, very, very good job for your first week, and I'm impressed. So even if you think that you're not doing super great, just take it from me. I've seen a lot of students go through the basic strokes, and you guys are doing great. I scroll through the posts all the time and feel like you guys are doing a great job. So I want to give you a little rundown of how this extra help video is going to work. So I'm clicking around here at the same time, popping some notes up on the screen. So if I'm looking down, it's because I'm trying to manage the technology at the same time as doing this teaching. But yeah, so generally I used to do these as live Facebook videos. And so I would just come on here, put my camera on my hands and do demos while people called out what they wanted in the comments. But that is a logistical nightmare when there's this many people in the course. And having this many of you is amazing, but it means I have to sort of alter things. So this time what I did instead was I put a thread in the Facebook group, and lots of you commented on it. Thank you. And I've gone through almost 400 comments, and I've kind of categorized them into groups of what I think makes sense. And I've taken a lot of people asked about this topic and a lot of people asked about this topic. So I've grouped them together and I'm going to go through them all. So even if I don't call out your name, it's not because I didn't see your question. I saw your question, and I'm going to try and put them all kind of how it makes sense to explain things best. And so this week is really about, get this note up on screen. This week is really about general help. So a lot of logistics things and things that you need to know in order to do any of these basic strokes. And then next week, I'm going to do actually some more advanced help on the nuances of every stroke. So some of you were asking, at the top of my oval, I get a little notch, or at the bottom, I can't make it flat, I can't make it straight, stuff like that. And I'm going to go over that all in the week 2 extra help video. So I've seen your questions on those. I'm not ignoring them. And they're great questions. And I can answer them all, and I will. But this week, I want to go over kind of the very basic stuff. And then next week, we'll get really deep into it. And the other reason I like to do that next week instead of this week is because you're naturally going to notice that now, as you go back to the same strokes again on week 2, that you're going to naturally be better at them, and you're going to be able to fix those problems on your own. So, and I promise that's not just like a cop-out, me not wanting to show it to you today. You're going to notice that week 2, you're going to have a big difference in your strokes, and you're going to be much more familiar with the tool, and you're probably not going to have the same issues you did in week 1. So next week, again, I'll get into those kind of nuancy things, but this week, just going to go over the basics. And then in week 3, for the extra help video, I'm going to do student critiques. So keep posting your work in the Facebook group albums, and then also on Instagram and on Teachable, and I'm going to go through them all. And in week 3, I'm going to pull a bunch of your work, and I'm going to critique it on camera for everyone to see. Very scary. Just kidding. It's not scary at all. But yeah, that's going to be fun. So week 1 today, some general stuff. Next week, some nuancy stuff for each of the strokes. Week 3, we're going to do some critiques. And then week 4, not really sure yet. So I'm not going to tell you what week 4 is yet. But I think that's pretty much it. So as long as that sounds good, I mean, you can't answer me because this isn't a live video this year, but I think that's probably, you all are going to agree with that. So let's just jump in. I'm going to answer some of the logistics questions and stuff like that with my face on camera, because it doesn't make sense to have my camera on my hands while I answer these things. And then I'm going to flip the camera onto my hands and do some of the demonstration requests. So the first kind of big thing that we should just touch on briefly is how to post on social media. And if you're overwhelmed by social media, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that social media is an optional portion of this course. You do not have to use social media. And if it's stressing you out to be trying to post in the albums on Facebook or on Instagram, don't worry about it. You can post in the comments on Teachable, or you can just not even post at all. So just don't worry too much about it. But I do want to touch on how to post in the albums on Facebook, because a lot of people are struggling with that. And I promise you, we've tried lots of different things on how to have people share their work on Facebook, and this is the best option. I know it's not perfect, and I wish I could give lots of feedback to Mark Zuckerberg, but until we meet, we're gonna have to go with this for now. So every day there's a new album in the Facebook group, and you are just gonna go into that album and post your picture in there. If you post it on the main wall of the group, it's not going to be approved, because that gives everybody in the group a notification, and it's just kind of crazy with this many people in the course. So your picture has to go in the album. Now that's going to look different depending on what device you're using. So it's either going to be under photos or media or albums. It's one of the tabs in the Facebook group. So you're going to have to find whichever one it is on the device that you're using, and just drop your picture in there. A lot of concerns about not being able to find your picture again afterwards. I know, again, it's not perfect, but if you go into the group and you type in your name in the search bar, you can generally find anything that you've posted in the past or commented on. And the other thing is you'll get a notification if anybody likes or comments on your picture. So trying to go back and find it, I mean, there's not a huge reason you would need to do that other than if someone commented, and then you would get a notification. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But again, don't worry too much about the social media stuff. It's kind of a secondary portion of this course. The next question is, I've gotten a couple of concerns about getting one-on-one critiques or getting feedback on your work, and wondering why you're not getting feedback on every single picture you post. I just want to reiterate that we are not going to be able to give feedback on every single picture you post. It might even happen that you post your pictures all semester and only get likes and never any comments and stuff like that. And I mean, it's just the nature of it being a free course, and there only being me and the 5 mentors trying to help this many people. So please be realistic about that. We're trying our very best to help you. And we go through all the pictures in the course, and if we see anything like blatantly wrong with your work, we're going to comment on it. So it's one of those instances where no news is good news. If you don't hear from us, it means that you're probably doing a great job. And my best advice is to just watch these extra help videos, make sure you've seen all the videos in the Teachable course, and course correct as you go, depending on what you hear other people asking. You can ask questions. I'll answer as many as I can. So just make sure you actually watch and read everything, and then correct yourself as you go, and you'll be good to go. It's not a matter of us having to see every single thing that you post. So I hope that helps. Okay, next question is, how much to practice every day? How much is too much? I'm just gonna pop this note up on the screen here. Okay, so how much is too much practice? I mean, if you are finding that your hand is super cramped up and you're not actually doing purposeful practice, then it's too much. I, at a minimum, want you to fill out what you're supposed to fill out for that day in your workbook. Everything's broken down by day, so just do that page of the day's work. But a lot of people want to do more, and that's totally fine. If you want to do more, you can. But if you find that you're sitting in front of the TV, not really paying attention, just kind of doing it over and over and over again, and not actually noticing if your strokes are good or bad, or if you're doing them properly, then you're kind of defeating the purpose. So I would rather you do 30 minutes or 20 minutes of really purposeful paying attention practice versus 2 hours of not paying attention at all, if that makes sense. So it's really a personal thing. If you find that you're getting tired and phoning it in, then that's too much practice. But if you are just doing, 10 minutes and rushing through it to say that you did that day's practice, that's also not good. So there's a fine line in the middle there. And speaking of, if you notice your hands cramping up, Eileen asked if there's anything that we can do to help with hand cramps, or if there's any stretches or anything like that we can do. So yes, it's not like a rule that you should be doing that, or that you have to do it a certain way. But it honestly is just like a matter of kind of opening and closing your hand, stretching it back and forth like this. Kind of just getting them, if you haven't been using your hands all day, which would never happen. Just kind of like squeeze them. You can get one of those stress balls and squeeze it a little bit, just like move your fingers like this. You can bend each one back and then bend each one forward and touch your thumb. Things like that I've seen calligraphers doing. And just kind of move it around, shake it out. But nothing spectacular that I can tell you, Eileen. Okay, the next question a lot of people were wondering was trying different pens all at once for this semester. So if you want to try a small pen, if you want to try a big pen, if you want to try the iPad, and you just kind of bought a bunch of supplies and you don't really know which one you're going to like the best. My advice for this is if you have the time to purposefully, like we talked about earlier, practice with each one, then you're okay. What I don't want to see is that you do like a row with your small pen and then switch to your big pen and do a row with your big pen and then do a row on the iPad, because you're going to kind of screw up your muscle memory if you do it that way. But if you have the time to take your sheet and do the whole row of small pens and then maybe a couple hours later come back and do it with your big pens and a couple hours later do it with your iPad, then you should be okay. As long as you can purposefully practice each different one, then you're okay. You just don't want to be like jumping all over the place, not purposefully practicing with each one, or you're not going to get the exact muscle memory you need for that pen. But I think a lot of people overthink that too. It's not a huge deal. If you want to try out different pens, this is the right time to do it also, because it's a free course and you can reprint the workbooks if you need to and stuff like that. So don't worry too much about it. That's going to be kind of a common theme in this whole course. Okay, next question. Actually, this is gonna be the last one that I touch on before I switch the camera around. So this was a question from Joy. And Joy said, how do you focus on all the things at once? Angle, releasing pressure, spacing. It's like I can only do one of them well. This is really, really, really common. And I feel like a lot of you that are listening to this probably relate to what Joy asked. At the beginning, it's really hard to focus on all the different aspects of learning calligraphy at the same time, because you're trying to focus on the shape, but you're also focusing on the pressure. You're also learning a new tool. You need to get everything on the right angle, everything like that. It's really, really challenging. And that's why at the beginning of this course, it's all tracing, and then you're going to get less tracing. So at the beginning, you can focus more on the pressure while you still have the tracing of the shape. And then as you kind of get further in the course, you'll have the muscle memory that incorporates all of those things. So it's gonna happen with practice, Joy. Don't think it's just you. It's really a common thing, and you're gonna be able to put them together easily as you build that muscle memory. Okay, so next question is about posture and positioning the paper. So I'm going to flip my camera so that you can actually see how I sit, and I'm going to show you exactly how I sit and hold my pen and hold my arm and everything. Okay, so you can see now the angle that I'm sitting at my desk. I'm sitting straight on to my desk like this. It's up to you if you prefer to sit straight on or you like to turn your body a little bit to the table. But what I want to point out is that I'm sitting right now with my full butt on this chair. And I want to actually pull my chair out a little bit so I'm sitting at the edge of my seat, which makes me sit up straighter. If you're sitting and you're leaning, you're going to have a hard time with your posture. So sit at the edge of your chair, sitting straight up, and then the height of your desk should be comfortable enough that your shoulders aren't hunched up like this, and they're not having to reach down and you're not having to slouch. So just sitting straight up, you ideally want your elbow to not hit the table like mine is right now. So this table that I'm writing at is not normally where I sit to write. I'm just doing this for the video. And this chair is a little bit too low. So ideally my chair would be a little bit higher and my elbow wouldn't hit the table if I were to do this movement. Okay, so having just a comfortable height that your shoulders aren't bunched up, but you're not hunching, you're sitting straight up and you don't have to like lean over too close to your page. That's the right height. Then again, I'm sitting straight on, and it's okay to turn your paper however feels comfortable for you, as long as it means that your pen can stay on the correct angle in relation to the paper, which I talked about in the opening videos on how to use a brush pen and how to use a pointed pen. So if you haven't seen that, go back and watch those. But all I mean is that you can turn your paper however it's comfortable for you. So if that means turning it really sideways, that's fine. If it means keeping it perfectly straight, that's fine. If you're a lefty and you're turning it upside down, I don't care, as long as you're comfortable at the table. Now, the next thing to note is that you don't want your paper to be all the way out here. so that you're reaching for it, but you also don't want it to be too close to you that you're bunched up again. You want it to be about in the middle of your table so that you can write comfortably and move your arm. And you also want to think about if you are writing at the top of the page like this and you're comfortable, and then you start to move towards the bottom and your arm gets bunched up, instead of moving your arm towards the bottom, move the paper. Keep your arm where it is so that you're not bunching up and you're not stretching out. You want to be still working in that comfortable zone on the page here and moving the paper instead of moving your arm. The next really important question that I often get is whether or not you should be using your whole arm or just your fingers or just your hand. And I'm going to show this again with the camera on my hand in a minute. But what I want you to think about is keeping about this part of your arm at the edge of your desk-ish in this kind of general area. And this is sort of like your pivot point. So you want to be able to move your whole arm and use your shoulder and your elbow instead of just your hand. You don't want your hand to be planted and only be able to use finger movements. If you're going to be, I mean, for doing the drills like we're doing here, if you're using a small or large tip pen, you're not doing too much movement. You don't need to use your whole arm to draw a small oval. But once you get more comfortable with calligraphy and you start doing stuff like flourishing, you want to be able to use your whole arm. So you want to get used to not planting your hand. Try and keep it like hovering. You can have it touching the desk. I know it's more comfortable that way. You're a bit less shaky. But try not to only use finger movements. You want to be able to use your hand and your wrist, and then ultimately pivot from your elbow as well. So just being fairly loose with it and not planting and squeezing and having a death grip on your pen is really good. Okay, so I think that's it for the posture stuff and the positioning stuff. Now I'm going to get the camera onto my hands and do some demos. All right, so first question was how to actually hold the pen. Now I did touch on this in the how to use brush pens video, where I think you should just be holding it, again, however is comfortable for you. So if that means holding it in this general area, which is pretty standard, or holding it lower, or holding it really high up, I don't really care how you hold it, like in relation to where it is on the pen, as long as you're comfortable and as long as it's working and giving you the outcome that you want. Now, if you're not getting the outcome that you want, if you can't get the thins and thicks, it might mean that you want to adjust your fingers a little bit. So if I'm holding my pen really low down like this, and I'm struggling with the shape, then it might mean I need to move my fingers up a little bit, and I'll be able to see the stroke better and give myself more space to work with. So you might notice that you're struggling, and in that case, try adjusting things like that. But for the most part, hold it wherever it's comfortable for you. The next question, and this one is a big one, is the pen angle. So I'm going to move this camera a little bit so you can see exactly how I'm holding it. So right now, my pen is perpendicular to my page. So this would be parallel. This is perpendicular, basically opposite of the direction of my page, which is right. And then my pen is on about a 45-degree angle to the page. So if I take this camera and show you here from a different angle, this is really hard. Let's see. Okay. So this is about a 45-degree angle to the page. This would be 90. This is 45. If I'm up too high, I'm too steep. And if I hold my pen really far down like this, I'm too, whatever the opposite of steep is, narrow. So you want to hold it at a 45-degree angle to the page, perpendicular, so that when you go to write, you can get the belly of the brush bending, giving you that nice thick upstroke. If I'm on too steep of an angle here and I try and do a downstroke, I'm not going to be able to get as thick as I could with that first one. I know this is an awkward angle to see, and you should see how I have to sit to hold this camera this way right now. But 45 degrees to the page, not too steep, not too narrow, and keeping it perpendicular. The one thing I do want to point out about this as well too is a lot of people, especially with big pens for some reason, a lot of people tend to want to, let's do a compound curve again for an example. A lot of people want to hold it really steep for the upstroke and then switch the angle and go narrower for the downstroke and then switch the angle to go lighter for the upstroke, because the tip of the pen, obviously, if you go straighter up and down, is going to be thinner than it would be on the side. I don't want you to ever change that 45-degree angle. I want you to keep that 45-degree angle and only change the pressure on the pen. Okay? So not changing the angle of your pen ever. Okay, I'm gonna switch to a smaller workbook and a smaller pen because I'm having trouble with this camera here being in my way. Okay, so I have this page. Let me bring the camera down a little bit closer here. So one of the questions that I got was from Frankie, and she said, hi, I don't know if it's just me, but whenever I freehand, my slant isn't like when I trace. Will that be a problem? Is it okay if my slanting varies? So I want to talk a little bit about the slant lines. So you'll notice that on this page, you have these really light slant lines, and all of the strokes that you're tracing follow those slant lines. Now, in modern calligraphy, that slant can be whatever you want. So I tend to write on the angle that I'm showing you in this workbook, and the reason that the lines are really faint is because they're a suggestion. You don't have to follow those. If you find you really like writing straight up and down or really, really angled to the side, that's totally fine. But this is a general, like, modern calligraphy style of slant that people like to use. So if you're comfortable with it, you can follow that. Now, when you switch onto just Rhodia paper that doesn't have those slant lines, you're naturally going to find that you have trouble following them. And especially if you're doing that in week 1, you're going to notice that you don't have the muscle memory. But over time, Frankie, you'll notice that your hand will naturally go on that angle that you're comfortable with, whether it's the one that I'm showing on this page or whether it's one that you develop over time. So just making sure that you put like an actual effort into keeping all of your strokes on the same angle, as long as you don't do, as long as your compound curve isn't on this angle and then your oval is on, wow, that's a terrible oval, that your oval isn't on this angle and then your, your ascending loop is back on the same angle as your compound curve, but then your overturn is on a different angle. You know what I mean? So you don't want them all to be on different angles. You want them all to stay on the same angle, but that angle can be whatever you want it to be. So I hope that makes sense for the angles. This next question is one that so many people asked, and it's about struggling with the thin lines. Now, I want to talk about something really important. If you are using, or let's say you've used both of these pens and you're kind of switching back and forth between the two, and you find that you're really struggling with thin lines, it's probably because with your small pen, let's use compound curve as an example again, you can get a really thin line for that upstroke here, okay? And then with your big pen, if you are trying to mimic the weight of that upstroke, you're going to have a really hard time. The big pen just naturally is never going to get as thin as the small pen. So when you're working with a big pen, you just have to set your expectation that your upstroke is going to be thicker. Okay? So as long as your upstroke is thinner than your downstroke, I don't care how thin it is. And the other thing I really want to make sure that everybody's aware of is that when you first get started, your upstrokes are always going to be thicker than you want them to be. I would rather see you have a thick upstroke. Okay, it's still thinner than your downstroke, but it's not shaky. So if you're trying to go too thin and you end up with a shaky line, yeah, sure, that looks like a nice, pretty hairline, but it's shaky and there's gaps in it, okay? So I would much rather you put a little more pressure on the page until you're comfortable with the pens, and naturally over time it's going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. But the other consideration here too is that some people are just heavy-handed. I'm one of those people. So when I do these strokes, I actually normally end up with about this sort of variation. This is my sweet spot for having a thin upstroke and a thick downstroke when it's still not shaky and it's a nice straight line. So don't be afraid to have it a little bit thicker than you think it should be. Even if it's thicker than what you're tracing on the page, it's totally, totally normal now as a beginner, okay? So that's my advice for the thin strokes. And next week, again, as we go through each of the strokes and I show you the nuances, I'm gonna show you a couple other tricks that will help you manage that thin to thick transition and the thick to thin transition. Okay, the next really big question that I often get and that so many people submitted this week was about shakiness. So if you're noticing that you're really shaky, we just touched on part of it here if you're trying to go too thin, but there's a couple other reasons you might be shaky. Number one, actually, I'm gonna write these on the page for you. So number one, coffee. This is sort of a joke, but not really. So if you drink a lot of coffee, which I do, I actually had 3 cups of coffee this morning, so I'll probably be shaky when I'm demonstrating this for you, but you might actually need to lay off the coffee a little bit. Number 2 is if you're trying to go too thin, which is what I showed you up here. So if you're trying to go too thin and you're not ready for that yet and you haven't really gotten the hang of how to use the tools, then you're gonna end up with shaky lines. Number 3 is if you're going too fast, which I discussed a lot in the drills videos, or too slow. So I know I told you guys to go really, really, really slow, and I still want that to be a thing. But if you're going too slow, you're gonna find that you're gonna get shaky. So let's do an example here. This is about the speed that I would recommend you go, okay? So you're gonna breathe in on your upstroke, out on your downstroke, and then in on your upstroke again. Okay, so it's like yoga breathing. But if you're going too slow, really trying to focus a little too much, and you're going really, really, really slow like this, that's too slow. You're gonna notice that that's shaky. It's thinner, but it's shaky. And again, if you're going too slow on the downstroke, it's actually working out pretty well for me on the downstroke, but on the up, it's gonna look shaky. Okay, so going too fast or too slow can make your lines shaky. And then number 4 would be if your angle is wrong, which I talked about a little bit. But if your pen is too straight up and down and you're holding it in an awkward position like this with your fingers and you're trying to get an upstroke, it's gonna end up really shaky. So making sure that you stay on that 45-degree angle is gonna give you the stability for your upstroke to not be too shaky. Okay, so lay off the coffee, try not to make it too thin, don't go too fast or too slow, and then make sure your pen stays on a 45-degree angle, and all of those things will help with your shakiness. The next question I saw a lot, and one thing that I see in people's work that they don't even know is a struggle, I'm going to demonstrate this with the big pen. Actually, let me get the big pen workbook out here. Let's do the descending loop because that's the day that we're on today, on Sunday. So on your descending loop, one of the common struggles, not just on your descending loop, but on all of them, one of the common struggles I see with beginners is being afraid to push too hard on your pen. Okay, so a lot of people will come in and they don't want to damage their pen and they hear about pens fraying, so they don't push very hard. And then it just doesn't look exactly as thick as you want it to be. What I want to see you do is not be afraid to push on your pen. So give it quite a bit of pressure and you can get a nice thick downstroke. That's not going to damage your pen. These are brush pens. They're meant to be pushed on like this. The one thing that I will point out though is that the strokes that are in the workbooks, they're scaled for any type of big pen really. So if you're using a Tombow like this one, you can actually get your downstroke to be thicker than what's showing on the page. So don't make a big deal about it having to match exactly the thickness that's on the page. You're just trying to match the shape really. And then don't be afraid to hurt your pen. Okay? So you're not going to hurt your pen. I'm telling you, especially with these large tip Tombows, you can get a really, really thick downstroke. Not saying that you should aim for that thickness on all of these, but if you push on it, it's not going to hurt it. What I will say though, and this goes for every brush pen, is that if you are pushing on it over and over and over again on that same angle, your brush pen is going to stop kind of bouncing back to the middle. So just rotate your pen. Every couple of strokes, rotate your pen so that it doesn't stick only on one angle. You'll notice that'll make a big difference in the wear and tear of your pen. And that goes for small pens too, every pen. Okay, so don't be afraid to hurt it. The next thing I want to talk about is the death grip, I like to call it, or just generally being heavy-handed. And I talked about this a little bit as I was talking about, your shaky upstrokes over here. But if you have a death grip and you find that you're really squeezing your pen and you're starting to really kind of struggle as you're working down the line, it's probably because you need to, every couple of strokes, just loosen your fingers. You might find that your hand is really cramping up. A lot of us don't write very often anymore, and especially concentrate that much while we're writing. So if you find that you're really squeezing your pen, or you even get like an indent in your finger, I know that always happened to me, just remember to loosen your hand every couple minutes. And that should actually remind you also to rotate your pen as you go. So rotating, loosening, just kind of uncramping your whole body and your hand as you go, and loosening up is really going to make a big difference in your work. Okay, and the last question, just before I do a quick demo of each stroke one more time this week, is can you fix a frayed pen? I'm afraid not. I'm afraid your pen is frayed. Once it's done, it's done. So what happens is if you use your pen on the wrong paper, or if you kind of just mistreat your pen and write on the wrong angles or don't rotate often enough, you'll notice that the tips of the pen, and this one's fine, so you don't see it on this one, but it'll start to kind of fray is the only real word for it. It'll just get like a little bit stringy and kind of leave you with some rough edges on your writing. So if you notice that that has happened, it's time to replace your pen. And just remember to go a little bit easier on it next time. Don't write on rough paper, don't push too much on it, and don't like write on the wrong angles. But no, the quick answer is you can't fix a frayed pen, sadly. All right, and now the last thing I want to do while I'm on camera here on my hands before I flip back to my face is I'm going to do a couple of each stroke with the big pen, because in the demonstration videos I did them in small pen. So here we go. For the upstroke, again, not worrying too much about making it super, super thin. You're just trying to make it consistent. One speed from the bottom to the top, slightly curved. Now again, if I were to do this with a small pen, I would have a much thinner upstroke, but with your big pen, you're really just trying to focus on making them consistent and not shaky. I'm going to switch to the downstroke here. And the one thing I'll point out here is that you can go much thicker with this pen that I'm using, this Tombow dual brush, but I'm going to try and match what's on the page here, roughly. Might go a little bit thicker than it. Again, rotating my pen in between strokes. You don't have to do it between every single stroke, but it's become so much muscle memory for me now that I do. Okay. And then the dreaded penguin shape. So this one, if you're struggling, I want you to go a little bit bigger. I'm going to demonstrate that here quickly. But for here, oh, here's a good example. Okay, this pen is fraying. So if you look at this one close up, you can see there's little fine spots here that are frayed. That's because this is an old pen I'm using. It's the only one I could find in my storage boxes. But if this weren't frayed, this would be working a little bit easier. Now I will say that this penguin stroke, we call it, is the hardest one. So if you're struggling with it, don't worry too much. And if you're struggling, allow yourself to go bigger. So instead of doing this one X height here, you're going to come all the way up to the ascender and do a long one. So I've lined up my paper here with those guidelines, and I'm going to do it a little bit bigger. Okay. Ignore that my pen is fraying because it's really quite damaged. I wish I had a better pen. I'll try and remember to show you next week without it being damaged, but it should be about this shape. So don't be afraid to go a little bit bigger if you need to. You can have an easier time doing it like that. Oh, I wish I had a pen that wasn't frayed to show you guys. All right, good enough. You guys get the idea. So that's day one, upstrokes and downstrokes. Day two, same thing with these, not trying to make your upstroke too thin. Same speed the whole way. Gradual transition at the top. Okay, so there's the overturns. Day 3 underturns. Same thing, nice thick. Don't be afraid to hurt the pen at the top. Slow transition at the bottom. See here, I tried to go too thin on that upstroke and it got shaky. So this one a little bit thicker. But again, as long as it's thinner than your downstroke, you're good. Again, try to go too thin. Okay, so again, correct yourself as you go. If I had a red pen right now, I would circle this and this. This one was actually my best one, the first one. Now to go on to the compound curve. Upstroke, downstroke, upstroke. And again, next week I'm going to get into kind of the nuances of each of these strokes, which is really important. I get a lot of questions about the compound curve because people really struggle with keeping this loop the same size as this loop. And we're going to get into that next week. Okay, so some compound curves. And we move on to the dreaded ovals. And start off to the side. Now with the oval, it's really important that you keep your pen on that 45-degree angle. And go nice and slow. Again, remembering that my pen is frayed, so yours should look a little nicer than these. But one of the temptations with the oval, and I shouldn't have been talking while I did that, is to go on a more vertical angle with your pen. You really don't want to do that. Try and keep your pen on a 45-degree angle because otherwise it's going to flip over itself at the top. There we go, that one was good. Okay, some ovals. Again, you'll even notice that with mine, there's a huge variation because I'm trying different things with every step that I go, every different oval I draw. I'm trying to correct the mistakes I made on the one before. All right, there's some ovals. Next, the ascending loop. Starting in the middle, and upstroke, and then coming down. This one was too shaky here. There, okay. And last but not least, the descending loop. Okay, there we have it. A demonstration of all the strokes with the big pen. And now I'm going to flip back onto my face because I have a few more things to say. Okay, so hopefully all of that was helpful. I know that a lot of you had questions that I didn't touch on this week, but a lot of them were really specific to the different strokes, which I said again and again that I'm going to go over next week. So this week, I want you to really keep trying yourself to fix those problems. And I can almost guarantee that you're going to figure out exactly what I'm going to troubleshoot for you next week anyway. But I want you to keep trying and finding the ways to hold your hand, adjust your fingers, like little tiny changes that are going to have huge effects on your writing. So hopefully everything we went over today was helpful. But the one thing I didn't touch on was any pointed pen issues. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it's because it's packed in there somewhere. Or maybe in there somewhere. And I just can't get it out right now to demonstrate for you. But the good news is one of our mentors, Florentina, is great at point and pen, and she's gonna film a little video for us that she's gonna be able to upload to us soon. So any of you using pointed pen, stay tuned for that. I'm gonna share it with you as soon as I can. And then hopefully next week I'll have all this unpacked and I can do a little bit more demo with the pointed pen for you. The last thing I want to touch on is just what's going to happen for week 2. So basically, we're going back and doing all the exact same strokes again, except you're going to do slightly less tracing and more freehand, and everything else is going to be the exact same. You're going to post it in the daily album. There's going to be a new album every day this week. The mentors and I are all going to be here to help you still, and yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, next week we'll have another video, and keep on keeping on. Don't panic. Just keep enjoying it. And I'll see you guys next week.